Hi, this is Melanie from Artifact and Landmark. Today's topic is about the founders of Doyle Co, a Pittsburgh glassworks that operated from about 1867 until about 1891, when the company became part of U.S. Glass Company. The founders include John C. McCutcheon, William Beck, and two of the three Doyle brothers, Joseph and William. Of all these founders, William Doyle seems to have stood out as a leader. After the founding of this work, the first major change to the partnership would sadly occur due to the passing of one of the founders, John C. McCutcheon, in 1877. He passes at the young age of 35, and although his life was short, John's life was very accomplished. John C. McCutcheon was born in 1841 on the south side of Pittsburgh, what was then called Birmingham. His parents were David and Mary McCutcheon, and they had 6 daughters and 2 sons. At the young age of 26, John helped to found Doyle Company. His background was as a clerk, so he would have been found in the office rather than out on the shop floor. In 1872, he became a founding director of the newly chartered Iron and Glass Dollar Savings Bank of Birmingham. In 1874, John is elected as director of the Ormsby Passenger Railway, which his partner William had been a director of since 1870. In 1875, he becomes secretary of the newly formed Western Flint and Lime Glass Protective Association, an association for glass manufacturers. In 1876, a year before his passing, John attempts to gain a seat on the board of another railway, the troubled Castle Shannon Railway. He does this through a cumulative vote, and at first the courts rule in his favor, validating the election and his seat on the board. Unfortunately, the next year, he passes on January 4th, 1877. Strangely, the very next day, on January 5th, the Supreme Court would overturn the previous ruling, effectively removing him from the board of the Castle Shannon Railway after his passing. His cause of death was pneumonia, and he's buried at the Uniondale Cemetery. A few interesting facts about John is that he lived his entire life on the south side of Pittsburgh at 70 and 72 17th Street, which you can see on this map from 1872. After John McCutcheon's passing, his wife and children moved to the other side of the Monongahela to 1007 Bluff Street, which is 4 blocks down from where another partner, William Beck, will eventually make his home years later at 1501 Bluff Street. The site of the McCutcheon's home at that 1007 Bluff Street is now the Richard King Mellon Hall of Science on the Duquesne University campus. Another glasswork is tied to Richard King Mellon, who is the grandson of Alexander King, the founder of Doyle Co. John McCutcheon's 3 daughters will remain single, all having careers as teachers, and they were perhaps influenced by their aunts, many of whom were also teachers in the Pittsburgh region. His son David will become a publisher, establishing a publishing company and a very popular mailing list called the McCutcheon Service. His second son, John, will become a doctor, and he'll practice in the suburb called Mount Lebanon. Now, the next 2 founders we'll cover are the 2 Doyle brothers, Joseph and William Doyle. They are 2 of the 3 sons born to Charles Carroll Doyle and Mary Robinson. We'll run through their lives in parallel. Joseph A. Doyle is born on December 4th, 1823, and his brother William Doyle is born about 4 years later in 1827. Both were born at Beck's Run, which is about 5 miles down the Monongahela River from Pittsburgh in what is now the Hayes neighborhood. Joseph and William started their glassworks careers at the age of 9 years old, working at the Bakewell's factory. Joseph would marry Elizabeth Jones in about 1846 at the age of 23, and his brother William married Ellen Kennedy in about 1849. In the 1850 census, we see Joseph listed as a glassblower, living in Lower St. Clair, a borough close to Birmingham, and he may have also been a partner in Bryce McCutcheon Co. before moving to Kentucky in about 1851, while his brother William moved to St. Louis about a year earlier in 1850. We believe that William would have been a partner at the Kentucky Glass Works. Unfortunately, during their time in Kentucky, their mother, Mary Robinson Doyle, passes on September 24th, 1854, cholera, during the epidemic of that year in Pittsburgh. Joseph and his brother William decide to move back to Pittsburgh in about 1860. Joseph would have been 37 and William would have been 34. They joined the partnership of Adams & Co., a glassworks we covered in another video that was also on the south side of Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, their father, Charles Carroll Doyle, dies on July 7th, 1866. The Doyle brothers decide to leave the Adams & Co. partnership in 1867. Joseph at this point is 44 and William is about 39, and they leave Adams & Co. to form their own glassworks called Doyle Company. At this point, we see the brothers also entering other business ventures. In 1870, William becomes a founder of the Ormsby Passenger Railway. In 1872, the South Side becomes part of Pittsburgh, and William is elected, along with Thomas Atterbury, as a councilman for the newly designated 29th Ward of Pittsburgh. In about 1872, we see Joseph move from the south side of Pittsburgh to a borough called Mifflin, just outside of Homestead, which is near his birthplace of Beck's Run. The street where he lived was named Doyle Street. It's now Doyle Avenue and can be seen on this map. His neighbors included his partner William Beck, a son-in-law Charles K. Bryce, who will also become his partner at Bryce Higby & Co., and another son-in-law, William Stymley. Although the map shows John Bryce, we know from an article and other bits that we know that Charles K. Bryce is actually living at this address. In the article from 1877, someone robs both Joseph and William Stymley's home, but when they get to Charles Bryce's home, apparently he chases off the thieves. In that same year of that article, in 1877, we also see, at the beginning of 1877, we see the passing of John McCutcheon, and a few months later, Joseph decides to leave the partnership. Joseph is now 54 and forms a new partnership of Hill, Doyle Co., which is a grocery dealer and a broom and brush manufacturer. Now getting back to Joseph's brother William, in 1878, William experiences two tragedies. First in July, that Glassworks burns down, and next month in August, his wife Ellen Kennedy passes at the young age of 48. His brother Joseph, in 1879, leaves Hill, Doyle Co. and founds a new glassworks of Bryce Higby & Co. in Homestead, which is located right by his home in Mifflin. One of Joseph's partners is his son-in-law, Charles K. Bryce, a son of John Bryce from the firm of Bryce, Walker & Company, soon to become Bryce Brothers. Meanwhile, in that same year, William Doyle, along with many others from neighboring glassworks, found the Pittsburgh Clay Pot Company that produces and trades in glass melting pots and other items needed for glass production. William was president of this company from 1886 until his death in 1894, when another famous glass founder, A.H. Heisey, steps into the role. In 1880, we see William's family experience another tragedy with the passing of his daughter Molly. In that same year, he moves from the south side to Walnut Street in the borough of Mount Oliver and marries Mary Hardy Moy, a widower. She'll bring 4 children from her previous marriage into the union. The children are Oscar, Charles, Edward, and Laura Moy. A few years later, in 1881, Joseph Doyle leaves the partnership of Bryce Higby & Co. to start a new partnership of Doyle Sons & Co. in Phillipsburg. Along with his 2 sons, we believe his brother Henry was also part of this firm. This advertisement from 1883 shows them located in Watercure, which is a post office location for Phillipsburg. Unfortunately, the plant wasn't a success and is eventually sold to the Phoenix Glass Company in 1885. You can see on this map of Monica, the new name for Phillipsburg, 2 Phoenix Glass locations. In 1884, we see both Joseph Doyle and his son William H. Stymley selling up their properties on Doyle Street to go west. We know that Stymley settles in Colorado, but it seems that Joseph never settled. In that same year of 1885, Joseph's brother William welcomes a newborn son, but unfortunately, his only other 2 sons passed that same year. These 2 sons were William, who would have been 28, and Harry, who would have been 26 years old when they passed. His newborn and only remaining son is named Donald Bryce Doyle, and we're not sure which Bryce brother he would have been named after. In 1891, Doyle Co. is sold to U.S. Glass, and the next year in 1892, William's second wife, Mary, passes at 48, the same age as his first wife. Now, Mary's will includes a few stipulations that are worth pointing out. The first is that she names James H. Horner, husband to her daughter, Laura Moy, as guardian to her young children, Bessie, who would have been 10 years old, and Donald, who would have been 7 years old at Mary's passing. She may have done this since she knew her husband was getting on in years. She also stipulates that her husband, William, the Horners, her children, Bessie and Donald, will all remain in the family mansion in Mount Oliver, and the children should also receive a fitting education. Unfortunately, her husband, William, dies only a few years later on February 12, 1894. So he leaves behind from his first marriage 2 children, Annabelle Doyle Boyd and Nellie Wolfe Marshall. Nellie will pass soon after in 1896. Tragically, Nellie's infant son passes at 16 months, and then her husband, T.C. Marshall, drowns in 1899 in Wheeling, West Virginia. It's unclear if this was an accident or if this was what we'll just call from melancholy. William also leaves 2 children from his second marriage, Bessie Robinson Doyle and Donald Bryce Doyle. These children will live with their sister Laura Moy Horner, moving to a newly built home at 201 North Craig Street in about 1899. After William's passing, we'll see the passing of Joseph's wife, Elizabeth, in 1903, and Joseph himself will pass on April 2nd, 1909, at the age of 86 years old. Joseph Doyle's son, William, will become a farmer in nearby Baldwin in about 1887 after the death of his father-in-law, Jesse Cunningham, who leaves them a plot of land. On that plot of land in Baldwin, you can also find the street named Doyle, named after this family. And currently the Baldwin High School field sits at the eastern part of this lot, which you can see here. Joseph's son and namesake, Joseph Doyle, becomes a doctor. He first attends Thiel College in Greenville, Pennsylvania. He then works in the glass trade for Bryce Higbee & Co. and as part of Doyle Sons & Co. from about 1882 to about 1889. He then shifts into a medical career, and his medical studies started at Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York City, and then he enters the medical school of the Western Reserve College in Cleveland, Ohio, graduating in 1893. After his father passes in 1909, he moves from Homestead to Greenville, Pennsylvania, and will live out the remainder of his years in Greenville. Joseph Doyle also, of course, leaves 3 daughters, Mary Stymley, Emma Doyle Bryce, and Elizabeth Doyle Byrne. The last subject of our video today is the final partner, William Beck. Many of his brothers founded successful businesses in the glass industry. These include Washington and James, who first were both partners at Beck, Phillips & Co., and then Washington also went and founded his own mold-making business. Now, the Beck family seems to have experienced a disproportionate amount of tragedy, suffering many losses due to tuberculosis. His brother Washington and Samuel and his wife Rachel will all pass from the disease. And just for context, a newspaper article reports the amount of deaths due to the disease over 10 years starting in 1880 to give you an idea of the death rate. During this time, you can see that about 1 in 10 people died from tuberculosis, which was also called consumption at the time. Now, William Beck started life on December 21, 1836, and he passes on September 4, 1904 at 1501 Bluff Street. He was born to William and Jane Beck. The family would have 7 children with 5 boys and 2 girls. Unlike the Doyle brothers, William Beck began his career not at Bakewell at 9 years old, but at 8 years old at the Imson Bottle Factory on the south side of Pittsburgh. In 1858, at the age of 22, he marries Rachel Williams. He was a glass journeyman, working as a glass blower at different glass factories before founding Doyle Co. in 1867 at the age of about 31. During that time, we see him living at 73 South 13th Street on the south side. In about 1872, he moves along with Joseph Doyle to Mifflin on what will become Doyle Street, which you can see here on this map. We know he returns to the south side in about 1879, and he's elected as a councilman for the 29th Ward for the year of 1882 to 1883. Unfortunately, on May 25th, 1886, William's mother, Jane, passes. In 1888, William moves his family to 1501 Bluff Street. You can see this location on the map. Today, it's the location of the UPMC Mercy Hospital. So you can see on this map where the hospital got its name to the left. And just as a quick note, the Sisters of Mercy Hospital is said to perhaps be the first permanent hospital in Pittsburgh, opening in 1847 or 1848. In 1890, his brother Washington Beck passes on February 23rd of tuberculosis, and he had been suffering from it for about a year. And as a reminder, he was a leading glass mold maker and a founder, along with their other brother James, of Beck, Phillips & Co. He was only 50 years old when he passed. We know that he stood at about 5'10", had a long narrow face with blue eyes and sandy brown hair. Their father, William Sr., passes that same year in 1890 at the age of 82. 2 years later, in 1892, his wife, Rachel Williams Beck, also passes from tuberculosis. She had suffered for about 5 months before her passing, and she was only 54 years old. In 1894, he loses yet another brother, Samuel, to tuberculosis. He was only 52 years old. He'll lose another brother in 1898. This time it's James, who is the other founder of the Glassworks of Beck's, Phillips & Co. In 1895, he does become a director of the Iron and Glass Savings Bank. Unfortunately, William Beck experiences more tragedy in 1900 when his son Henry passes. Henry, or what he was more commonly known as Harry, was born September 20th, 1860. He doesn't pass of tuberculosis, but of a horrible accident. On December 3rd, 1900, he accidentally falls from the top of the stairs at Marion and Bluff Streets, and he was seen tumbling down the hillsides to his death while trying to break his fall. From the top of the bluff to the bottom at 2nd Avenue, it would have been about 100 feet. You can see the location of these steps on this map. Now, William Beck passes 4 years later in 1904, and he leaves 2 sons and 2 daughters. We have Robert, who is born in 1867 and marries Linda Young, Alberta Williams, who's born in 1869, and she marries Louis F. Wentz. We have William, who's born in 1873, and he marries Letitia Haggerty, who unfortunately dies the next year in 1906 of typhoid fever. And then, of course, he had his daughter Sarah, who's born in 1879, and she first marries Robert Urich but divorces in 1906 and is remarried to John M. Johnston in 1907. An interesting point is that William Doyle's final resting place is at the Southside Cemetery in Pittsburgh. Their plots are right next to each other and a stone's throw away from John Adams, William Doyle's previous partner at Adams & Co. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the lives of these founders of Doyle & Company and their families. Subscribe to learn more about American glass companies and their founders.